Good morning, everyone. This is John Hierdink. I'm the managing member of Tribe Public, a company that enables all to gain access to and understanding from leaders and experts across all industries. Welcome to today's Tribe Public CEO presentation and Q&A event, as we call them. In this case, this one is titled "Exploring the Rapid Rise of Osteoarthritis." Very interesting topic, and I'm happy to have this discussion today. And thank you for the questions you've sent in already. And note that you can send in further questions as they come to mind as we push forward through this relatively approximately 30-minute presentation and Q&A session with Eupraxia Pharmaceuticals CEO, Dr. James Helliwell. We're proud to have him on the show today and look forward to having him present. Before that, I do need to put forward a couple disclaimers. One is please find our website, tribepublic.com, TRIBE public.com. Please view all disclaimers there. Note that I am an investor in the company and serve as an advisor, and also that I'm the managing director of a registered investment advisory firm in California called Vista Partners. The website there is vistapglobal.com, and please view all disclaimers there as well. Again, back on Tribe Public, we've had over 30+ countries now have joined our webinars, and hoping to continue building on that. Obviously, our Tribe network has grown over the years, and specifically here in the U.S., in addition to the webinars, we also host in-person events, primarily around luncheons or dinners, where we have these CEOs and experts come out to see you in these company-sponsored events, and we're up to around 32 event sites now across the U.S. Please visit the site. The list is there, and if you don't see yours, please voice your opinion through our wish list process after joining the Tribe, which is a free service, and express either the companies you'd like to see, either through a webinar or coming out at the events, and/or if you would like to have today's presenter, Eupraxia and Dr. Helliwell, come out to see you sometime in the near future, so you can get some direct time with him and learn a little bit more. Just let us know. Again, the wish list process is a simple process where you just enter the names and express via our website, or send us an email back at any point at research@tribepublic.com. Today, what I would like to start with is having Dr. Helliwell tell us a little bit about his background and how he came to found Eupraxia Pharmaceuticals. Note, Eupraxia trades on the TSX and the NASDAQ under the symbol EPRX. And then we'll invite him to pull up his presentation. It'll be about 15-20 minutes, 2-minute Q&A. Please send in those to us at any point, any of those questions. And again, thank you all for participating, and thank you, Dr. Helliwell, for presenting today. Will you please introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, John. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And to the Tribe, thank you very much for being here and for listening, and look forward to answering your questions as well and seeing you in person if that's something that works out. So a little bit of background on myself. So I'm a physician. I'm a cardiothoracic anesthesiologist. So that means I went through anesthesiology and then did additional time specializing in heart surgery, particularly in heart transplantation. What's really interesting about that is that there's sort of two pieces to that. Anesthesiology we think of as pain medicine. So a lot of my core training is actually in pain medicine, how to manage it properly and how to manage it over the long term and in the acute phase. The other piece is doing heart transplants. Precision matters very much to the patient's outcome, just as it does when you look at less critical things. But when you're talking about those critical patients, precision is everything. And so really, what I looked at was what we could do in the operating room, but what we couldn't do for outpatients and that level of precision of delivering drugs. And that's why I founded Eupraxia about 11 years ago now. And we've developed a platform to be able to solve a lot of problems. Today, we're talking about osteoarthritis. We also have a phase 2 program in gastrointestinal disease, and look forward to advancing in oncology in the near future. So thank you very much for having me, John.
You're certainly welcome. And again, remind y'all, as he begins to present here, I'm going to have him pull up his presentation. If any questions come to mind, just send them over the Zoom chat feature, and we'll do our best to try to get them addressed. We're going to try to keep this relatively brief for all today. And note that if you want to review this, we'll be publishing the video as soon as possible today, tomorrow morning, at our TriPublic YouTube channel, so that you can either review any of the footage today, if you will, in the presentation, or want to push that on to others. Thanks again. Please begin, James.
Great, thank you very much, John. Just a few of the forward-looking statements we're going to be making today. But with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about osteoarthritis. So we often think of osteoarthritis as something that we all know somebody who has it, or we have it ourselves. And we think of it as aches and pains that disrupt our day. In fact, it is much, much more than that. When we look at doctor-diagnosed osteoarthritis, these are people who, for the most part, are having near daily pain. And if you look at the number here on this graph, you can see it is rising very, very rapidly. In other words, despite all of the advances that we have made in medicine, we are not having an impact in osteoarthritis. So there are 365 million knee osteoarthritis cases around the world. And really interesting, and I'm going to come back to the importance of this, hand osteoarthritis is the second most common. So we often think of knee and then hip and shoulder, and that's right, hip and shoulder are very significant, but hand is actually the second most common. And yet we really haven't developed much in the way of treatment that's good, safe, and effective over the very long term. So let's take a little bit of a sort of step back into actually what is osteoarthritis. So we think of this as a wear and tear disease. And the traditional thinking is I ran a lot of marathons, I played a lot of tennis, therefore I have osteoarthritis. That would lead you to sort of say, well, maybe then a lack of activity would actually protect me from that. In fact, that's not true at all. A lack of activity is pro-inflammatory, obesity is pro-inflammatory, and trauma is pro-inflammatory. What do I mean by that? Well, it turns out that while the beginning of osteoarthritis may be sort of a traumatic event. So it may be you ran a marathon, it may be that you tore your ACL, something like that. What actually creates the disease state is this inflammatory cascade. And what do I mean by that? When you damage your body, and it can be anything from a cut to surgery to you get in a car accident or you break a bone, you have all these little mediators that come out from the body, and they are pro-inflammatory. They're what make things swell. They're what make things hurt often. And that's exactly what is happening right within the joint. You can see in the image on the right there, all of these things that are going on, that's really an immunologic sort of process. And what that's actually doing is, if you look at the picture on the left, that is what is damaging the cartilage. And it's damaging not just the surface of the cartilage, but actually getting right through into what we call the subchondral bone. It means that's the bone underneath the cartilage. So in order to stop osteoarthritis, it is not just a matter of changing lifestyle or changing activity. We're going to talk more about that. You actually need to stop this biochemical process. So if we understand this, why are we having so many difficulties, and why is it that osteoarthritis continues to grow in prevalence? So the answer to this is multifactorial. So number one, and probably amongst the most important, is our population is aging. In other words, the average age, particularly in the Western world, that we get to in our lifetime, has grown exponentially over the last 100 years. And as a result, that's a lot more time for this inflammatory process to cause damage to our joints. The other really important thing is obesity and rising body mass index. So when your body carries more weight, it's more stress. Obesity is pro-inflammatory. At the same time, it's also putting more stress on that joint. stimulating that reaction with all of that inflammation that's in there. And thirdly is joint injury or trauma. So this can be you're skiing, you tear your ACL, you do that in squash, whatever it is, that trauma starts that cascade. So even when you fix your ACL, you still see people will end up having osteoarthritis much earlier with a history of trauma than they would without that trauma because of that runaway inflammatory cascade. So now that we have a little bit of an understanding of what is osteoarthritis, we can start to then tackle, okay, how do we actually solve this problem and who do we solve the problem in? So when we look at the US market now, so we're going to narrow down from the world into the US. So what you see in this chart here is knee osteoarthritis by severity. So these are recent data from 2023. So you're talking about 18 million patients. And if you look at this, you're looking at about 13 million who are both moderate and severe. So mild patients tend to have pain intermittently. They don't need chronic treatment. They actually are fairly well managed by today's medicine. So Tylenol, ibuprofen, Celebrex, those medicines are doing a good job of intermittently controlling the pain. The moderate and severe, however, are having pain every day. They often wake up in pain, they go to bed in pain, they have pain with activity, climbing stairs, carrying their groceries. Their daily life is impaired by this. And so that's about 70% of people who have OA. This is knee OA. This also then applies to the hand, to the hip, and to the shoulder. 70% of patients with knee OA actually have both knees that hurt. This becomes a really important thing when we start to talk about treatment. 30% of these patients are actually diabetics, which means that we need to find therapies that are safe in diabetics chronically. And we will look again, this is very much a market that is growing. And in other words, there are more and more patients who are actually needing our help. This is incredibly evident when we look at the very large unmet need, as well as the costs that are being borne by the system today for lacking a very effective treatment for osteoarthritis, where we can actually control patients and have them actually run with their lives. And so when we look at this, $185 billion direct dollars actually spent in osteoarthritis care in the United States. So this is everything from pharmacologic treatments to joint replacements that we need to do as the disease gets really bad. Knee osteoarthritis accounts for about 83% of that total cost burden in the United States. One of the very interesting things about this is that, again, we think about osteoarthritis as just a joint problem, or people often do. Those who have osteoarthritis will tell you it feels like much more than that. And the reality is that it is. So let's just pause for a moment and think about this. This is not just about treating pain and dysfunction of osteoarthritis. This is actually about the whole health of the patient. So we know from trials that there is an increased all-cause mortality if you have osteoarthritis. That is an independent risk factor. You're more likely to have a cardiac event. And there's a couple of reasons for that. It is not just the fact that you have osteoarthritis and are less active, but also the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories actually carry with them, if you use them chronically, a significant cardiac risk. 41% of all the heart attacks that occur in OA patients are actually directly due to their non-steroidal anti-inflammatory use, not to mention other complications associated with that. In addition to that, the mental health concerns of people with osteoarthritis have a significantly higher incidence of depression, depressive episodes, and so that then also requires management and carries issues. One of the things is that when we look at sort of the treatment for these patients, in fact, one of the first things to do, and this is what we really recommend for patients with mild and even moderate disease, we know, in fact, there was a very recent Danish randomized controlled trial. It means they had one group just carry on as normal and one group that they put on a 12-week exercise program. Those on the exercise program actually saw a reduction in their pain without any medication. In other words, the exercise and the movement itself reduced the inflammation in the knee rather than sitting there. Again, that comes back to what we talked about at the very beginning. This is not a wear and tear disease. Sitting still is not the answer. The other thing that we know is weight loss is actually quite important. We've all been following, the semaglutide, the Wegovy injections that people have been using in order to be able to lose weight with medicines that were originally intended for diabetes. They've been studying that in osteoarthritis. Well, it turns out if you take it for a year and you lose about 30 pounds, your pain in your knee goes down. Perfectly logical. We would all expect that. And so clearly there's a role to be played in losing weight. But when you look at what's on the screen in front of you here, so this is from the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons and also echoed by the American College of Rheumatology. And so what you're actually looking at here are the guidelines of what you should take and can't take. If you look at that long list of red, these are a lot of things that people think they should be taking. This includes hyaluronic acid, stem cells, platelet-rich protein, plasma that gets injected into the knee. All of those things are not recommended for use. On the left-hand side, you'll see that almost none of those are actually therapeutics, in other words, drugs. The only two drugs that are recommended for use are intra-articular, that means an injection into the joint, of a steroid. We've all heard about cortisone shots. They've been going for 50 years. They're not recommended for long-term continuous use, and non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, so that's things like Celebrex. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about Eupraxia, where we believe that we can actually really help to solve this problem for patients. Talked a little bit about getting at precision. What do I mean by that? So our DiffuSphere delivery technology that we have developed has a broad patent family that exists around the world and has been granted and has a very long patent life, covering both the composition of matter as well as manufacturing processes and others all the way into the early 2040s. That DiffuSphere allows us to give the right dose of drug, the right place, in this case the joint, for the right amount of time. So how do we do that? So I'm not going to get too focused on all of the science here, but essentially what it is we create these little balloons, and these balloons float around inside the joint, and they are constantly delivering drug at a steady state using diffusion. Diffusion is very stable. When we think about all the other drugs that we typically see given, they deliver with a peak at the beginning and then a big trough. With the injectable steroids that have been used for 50 years, the problem with those drugs is that that peak of dose that you get at the beginning actually damages cartilage. In addition to that cartilage damage, it makes blood sugar go off, and it also makes your body's natural stress hormone, cortisol, drop off and stay away. But we need that to be able to function normally over the long term. So this is how our drug actually delivers. You can see it's very flat and very stable for a 6-month period of time. And that's the goal here. What we're aiming for is to be able to give something that is roughly, in most patients, about 6 months worth of therapy. Particularly, as you'll recall when we looked at this, the moderate patients make up the bulk of the patients, about 70%, who actually require treatment, so that have daily pain. And we know that they're going to require treatment for 5 years or more. So having safe and continuous therapy is incredibly important and not available today. So this is the study that really we're going to be talking about as evidence that we believe that we may have a very significant solution here for patients with osteoarthritis of the knee. And as we look forward, we can also imagine doing studies to be able to answer questions about hand osteoarthritis because of the safety that we can deliver. We know from our preclinical work that we have seen in these studies that we have actually protected cartilage. And that protection of cartilage is really important and really has been a first-in-class effect that we've been able to see. In this particular study, we looked at 300 patients. This is a very large study and designed to be one of our 2 pivotal trials that are designed for approval. What you'll see here is we did a 6-month follow-up, and we looked at pain, we looked at function, and we looked at safety. All of the critical things that are required in order to be able to provide safe and effective therapy. Now, we don't need to worry too much about what all the definitions are of WOMAC and everything else. What this is this is the standardized way of assessing both pain and function and stiffness. So that means the WOMAC total score, which you see on the left of your screen, is all of those things combined. And it's really telling us, how are you doing in your life? Are we making you better? What you see here is relative to placebo from an injection into the knee of just a vehicle versus our active drug delivering, again, with that very flat DiffuSphere technology. You're seeing here, we're getting 20 weeks of statistical significance, but maintaining the effect to 24 weeks. When we look at just the pain in both severe and moderate patients, you can see here that we get out to 17 weeks with statistical significance, but really maintain that meaningful effect for roughly 6 months. Now, we talked about moderate patients. We pre-specified looking at these moderate patients because they are so important and they are the bulk of the patients. We also set a very high bar for ourselves, and we looked at something what we call OMERACT-ORSI strict responders. So this is the Osteoarthritis Research Society International, and they have defined what is clinically meaningful. So using their definition, looking at the impact we had in moderate patients, this means we've improved their pain by greater than 50% and at least 2 points on a 10-point scale. We did that with statistical significance to 22 weeks. In other words, for roughly 6 months, these patients got to a place where they did not have daily pain. They did not require any other medical treatment in order to be able to control their pain and live their life. That's incredibly important. So that means that we've found, we believe, the solution for a very effective treatment for a 6-month period of time. In addition to that, you'll recall that 30% of patients were diabetics. So the impact that you have on glucose is really important. We do not want to affect their blood sugar. And in this trial, we demonstrated we did not. In other words, this will become safe for diabetics is our expectation. And that means that this has the potential to actually be the first-line treatment in the 4 to 5 million patients suffering from osteoarthritis who have diabetes, giving them therapy in the long term that will help them not just overcome their osteoarthritis, but perhaps also be more active, which helps control their blood sugar and actually help them beat their diabetes and control it, as well as control their weight by being able to be active. So what we really demonstrated here in this trial was not only that we had the efficacy, but also that we had the safety systemically and locally to be able to provide a safe and continuous therapy. Moving very briefly on from osteoarthritis, what you'll see here is that is ready for its phase 3 program, which will begin in 2025. We are also in the middle of a phase 2 program in a disease called eosinophilic esophagitis. It is an allergic inflammatory reaction within the esophagus itself. It is a very rapidly growing disease causing a lot of dysfunction, sort of for a patient's lifetime. There are not really very effective therapies today that are available, that are convenient, delivered by the physician, and working really well and really safely for patients. So we look forward to seeing continued data in that program. So you can imagine in oncology and cancer, this kind of precision could be incredibly valuable, and we look forward to exploring that more over the next year or so. For the remainder of this year, we have an incredible number of catalysts. Those catalysts are related both to osteoarthritis as we continue to present our data around the world, and advance business development discussions, where we're in some very interesting discussions with potential commercial partners where they would like to actually use this product in their sales bag and sell it to patients throughout the world. In addition to that, in our gastrointestinal program that we just talked about, we have data releases multiple times through this year, which we believe will be really stimulating catalysts for the company and for the stock. In terms of the stock, where are we? So again, as mentioned, the NASDAQ ticker is EPRX. It is the same on the TSX. So the current price is $2.50 on the NASDAQ. We have quite a tight shareholding. We have 35.6 million outstanding shares, fully diluted common shares of roughly 51 million. The balance between there is primarily warrants, the majority of which are struck at $3 Canadian, or about $2.25 US. So we're actually in the money already today, and those expire in early 26, and will represent about $35 million in deferred financing to the company. So our market capitalization is about 92 million, and cash on hand, we have roughly $36 million in the bank today, and we've been burning about $5 million a quarter. So where we are today, we look forward very much to having a long runway that takes us into at least the middle of 2025. So we have no needs to be going to the capital markets in an urgent fashion, and look forward to be able to continue delivering data, solving problems in osteoarthritis, as well as in gastrointestinal disease. So I'm going to pause there. I want to leave time for questions, but really, really appreciate everybody taking the time, and hope that that was an interesting exploration of osteoarthritis, the severity of that disease, and just the way in which we, Eupraxia, believe we have a solution that will really be first and best in class to be able to help patients. So John, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, James. Great presentation. We do have a few questions here that were sent before and some during, and I would encourage anyone that to send anything else that comes to mind, and we'll do our best to get it. If you don't think of it during this webinar, just send it to us anyway. We'll do our best to do it to get him to address them. At the same time, remind you that we would like to get Dr. Helliwell out across the U.S. In the near future, and we have some events planned. But if you don't hear from us, please let us know and just send us your interest and where you'd like to see him. So one of the first questions is, why are current treatments failing patients? You spoke a little bit to that. Is it a safety or efficacy issue?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. So when we look at those things that are effective, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, intra-articular steroids, one of the things that's a problem there is that they both carry with them significant side effects. So in other words, you can't actually use them daily as you require for every day that you have pain for the next several years. But that's really what patients need. On the flip side, those things that are safe, think of an intra-articular hyaluronic acid, that we talked about earlier, is actually not recommended for use, but is very, very safe. And to be clear, they're selling close to $1 billion a year of that product, even though it has been determined not to really work any better than placebo in large trials. So what that tells you is safety is really, really important. And what we need is what we believe that we have here, which is a combination of the safety of a hyaluronic acid, but with the effectiveness of an intra-articular steroid.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what about products to grow cartilage, perhaps using gene therapy or stem cells?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting. And in the sort of 11 years that we've had the company, most of the questions were, okay, so what's the competitive environment look like? And the competitive environment for many years was people were developing gene therapies to grow cartilage. And all of those studies, while some people grew cartilage, they never made patients actually feel better. So all of those products have failed. And so the FDA is fairly firm on this. If you grow cartilage, but patients don't feel better and their function isn't any better, then you didn't do anything. So the patient always comes first. Clearly, cartilage matters, and clearly we want to stop cartilage degrading, and we want to ideally grow it. We are never going to grow it at Eupraxia, but we would go very, very well with a product that someday actually has the ability to grow cartilage, where you can't give something that damages it like the current therapies that are available today. Then you'd be sort of pushing at each other in two different angles. So we look forward someday to osteoarthritis not being a disease. In the meantime, we think that's a very, very long way off, as there's nothing close in development right now. So for the next 10 to 20 years, we hope that we provide patients with a lot of therapy.
Okay, so sort of a follow-up there. Are there any potentially competitive OA trials advancing, preclinical or clinical, while you continue to seek a partner for the OA program?
Yeah, so when we look, there's an approved product on the market today, and that product is approved for a single use because of side effects according to the FDA and the published literature there. And so that provides 3 months of therapy. So that's sort of the gold standard today, that product. There are other products that are currently in development. So there's a liposome product that was going through phase 3 trials. And there's some question about that data, about whether those phase 3 trials were failures or not. That product was licensed out and then handed back after a failed phase 3 program. And really, though, when we look at long-term therapy from a single injection, providing efficacy, increased function, as well as the safety, particularly also for the diabetics, we don't see anything directly competitive. We do see a couple of potentially complementary products that are, 5 to 7 years behind. And we look forward to seeing those as they continue to develop. Unfortunately, in osteoarthritis, there are very few products that have actually made it through that have been both safe and effective. And so patients are really needing something new that provides that safety and that efficacy.
Okay. Related to that another question says, can you share, are you aware of any recent comps and evaluations for partnerships or acquisitions in the clinical stage OA space?
Yeah, so there's really two. So one was a company called Taiwan Liposome Company, developed a product, TLC 599. And that product was acquired by Endo Pharmaceuticals. And I believe it was a $30 million upfront. And there was a commitment to a lot of back end. That deal, our understanding from public disclosures, is it fell apart after Endo announced the failure of the phase 3 program with TLC 599 and terminated that relationship based on that failure. So that was for a sort of mid-stage product and what we were looking at. And I think the other one, which again is quite a few years ago now, was a company, Flexion Therapeutics, that developed a very good 3-month product for single use that lasts 3 months. They were acquired for just around $600 million by another company, Pacira Biosciences, who currently markets that product in the United States. So that is a relatively good comp as well. There are, on top of that $600 million, there's a variety of back-ended pieces to that, which we're unsure of how much of that has happened. So, but the 600 is there. Other than that, there really hasn't been a lot because people just haven't been successful. Getting to phase 3 with size and looking to sort of one trial left. Frankly, there's just not a lot of companies that have made it this far.
Okay, thank you. Related to that, says, can you compare and contrast your LAI fluticase to TLC 599 and Zilretta?
Yeah, so absolutely. So TLC 599, that's the one that I just talked about with the failed phase 3. And so I think that there's a lot to that data there. And clearly there's some debate about what's happening with that data. So it's difficult for me to comment. There's probably perhaps more trials required there, but that will be between the company and the regulator. In terms of Zilretta, I think that it has underperformed in the market from what people have expected. And I think that there's a very simple answer for that. It is a very effective product for 12 weeks. It is giving people good pain relief, improvement in function. However, based on the FDA's approval and the label that they have, which really restricts it to a single use. Remember, we're talking about 14 million people, but those 14 million people need therapy every day for years. And so if you put a product out that provides some therapy but has to stop, then you're not really addressing that market. And that means you're not addressing that commercial market because you're selling it once and that's it. And really what you want to be doing is ensuring that you're always providing that safe and effective pain relief. And so I think for Zilretta, that label has really impaired their ability to tackle the market because payers aren't going to pay for a second and third dose for the most part when the FDA has sort of made it pretty clear on the label that they shouldn't be doing that. So again, I think if Zilretta had a different label, it would be a very different commercial product.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question. Isn't OA pain just aching? And why does it matter if treatments aren't perfect or people can't be free, pain-free every day?
Yeah. So I mean, it isn't, we sort of talked a little bit about this, but OA has very significant sort of side effects. In other words, overall mortality is higher, heart disease is higher, the complications of the medications like non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, those are really significant. Comes with heart attacks, gastrointestinal risks, kidney failure. And so it's very, very important that we understand that the disease itself is having a big impact on all the other organ systems. And in addition to that, that the treatments that are available today are also providing complications. So it's really important for this very large patient population that we strive to find something that is safe and effective, which we believe our data shows that we've done. And we look forward to continuing that process with the FDA and getting into patients as a commercial product.
And I believe you addressed this, but let's just make sure, since it's popped up again here, can you talk about the mechanisms for TLC 599 and Zilretta and the contrast with your approach?
Yeah, so absolutely. So this is less about the drug itself. So each of the three products are using steroids. Each steroid is different, but every steroid that's been injected into the joint for the last 50 years has worked. What do I mean by worked? What it means is it controls inflammation, which controls pain and improves function. Every time we know that that works. However, when you deliver, whether an immediate release or an extended release that has a burst, what gets demonstrated is, number one, damage to the cartilage. And we see that in preclinical animal models. That's what the FDA really looks to. And that's what you see in the publications. In addition to that, that affects blood cortisol. So that's your body's natural steroid. It also affects blood sugar. So when we look at that, what is differentiated about our product versus every other injectable steroid is the pharmacokinetics. So if you remember that graph where you could see our drug delivery was a flat line, that flat line is the differentiating factor. So if we delivered our drug fluticasone, but it delivered with a peak and a trough, we'd have all the same problems as everybody else. So this isn't about the drug. This is actually about the diffusion mechanism through which we deliver it. And we see that not just in osteoarthritis, we also see that in our gastrointestinal disease and in other applications where we've looked at it, that it is the delivery and the location that provides the precision. In other words, we put it in the joint, it stays in the joint and delivers very therapeutically without running into the safety issues.
Thank you. That makes sense. Switching gears a little bit, can you, oh, by the way, are you covered by any, analyst in Wall Street on the stock side of this?
Yeah, so great question. We are covered by Raymond James in Canada, by Research Capital in Canada, and also Raymond James in the United States. They launched their coverage about 2 weeks ago. Gary Nachman there covers us.
Okay, and is that a buy recommendation?
It is a strong buy recommendation with a target price of $12 US.
Okay, I like the way he's thinking there. I have to get a hold of that piece after this. And hopefully Raymond James will be sharing it to many of their clients as we move forward. Can you just quickly sort of outline where you are again on this FDA process around this late stage program?
Absolutely. So we completed that trial that we talked about, the Springboard trial. We then went to the FDA and had what's called an end of phase 2 meeting. So an end of phase 2 meeting is when you go to the FDA and you present them with all of the data that you have generated thus far and present them with what you would like to do in order to get approval. And so based on that feedback, we believe that we have a fairly clear understanding and path from the FDA that there is a single trial required of us from now in order to be able to get an approval. And that trial will be about 700 patients. And those 700 patients, there will be 2 groups in there. One group is essentially the trial we just did, but more in order to fulfill the safety database requirements. The other will be a group who will be getting repeat dosing. In other words, they're going to wait 6 months and then get a second dose. And so what that means is that when we combine all of that, what we're hoping for is that it's very clear that we're going to be giving patients the kind of long-term therapy that they require. So long-term pain relief with long-term safety.
Okay. And sort of related to that, one is, can you tie again, you've got significant capital on the balance sheet. Does this get you through those trials and through these significant milestones that you've laid out for in 24? But and related to that is a partnership around that. When would that be most attractive, do you think, in the the way the current environment is?
Absolutely. So remember, although we've been focused on it, we have multiple assets, and our GI asset is an incredibly valuable asset, even more valuable than our osteoarthritis asset, and is in phase 2. And we look to have the conclusion of that phase 2 in mid-25. But again, a lot of data through 24 and early 25 coming in that program. And so as we look at that, it does ask the compelling question that you're asking is, what do we do with our osteoarthritis asset? We aren't a commercial company. We don't have a sales force. We have been engaged in very active discussions with people who have strong sales forces in this area and are looking for products that are going to be good for them and good for patients. And so we believe that there is an opportunity sort of between now and the early part of 2025 to affect some very interesting transactions, very good for shareholders and very good for patients, as these people will be co-development partners and take us through the phase 3 program and into approval. And then they will essentially sell it from their sales bag. That allows us to continue our focus on building our GI program up and continuing to deliver a lot of value there. And in terms of the cash on hand, yes, all the milestones that I talked about, we have cash on hand to be able to deliver all of those.
Fantastic. Well, I see that we've kind of brushed up against the time we've allowed for this today. And I think we've addressed most of the questions. I apologize if we haven't hit them all, but I think you've done a great job of doing that with us. And thanks again for the tribe that have joined us today. I hope that I'll get to see many of you soon across the US as I continue to fly across here again. And please let us know if you'd like to hear more from James, Dr. Helliwell, and Eupraxia as we move forward. Thanks again today for participating. Thanks again for sharing your story with us, Dr. Helliwell, and look forward to having you back on for updates as you hopefully hit these milestones as you've laid out. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again, and look forward to seeing and hearing from you all soon.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you.